Hello and welcome to the second of 4 Lunch and Learn webinars. My name is Shauna Fenwick and I'm your host today. This series is in follow-up to the virtual Heads Together think tank held last fall. We're hosting these sessions, these Lunch and Learn sessions now because June is Brain Injury Awareness Month. We want to foster conversations so that you will leave with new insights and ideas on how to raise awareness of brain injury in your own community. Today's topic is surviving an overdose, understanding the need for brain injury support. While we meet today on a virtual platform, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Indigenous peoples and traditional territories on which all of us here today work, live, and play. In Victoria, we live and work on the unceded lands of the Lekwungen-speaking people, the Songhees and Esquimalt nations. Please join me in a moment of reflection to acknowledge the Indigenous peoples and ancestral lands where you are joining us from today. Great. It's now my pleasure to introduce someone who may not need any introduction at all, Janelle Brice-Biagioni. Janelle was the inspiration for and the project manager of the Heads Together Think Tank series. She's also the founder of the Constable Gerald Brice, or CGB, Center for Traumatic Life Losses. Janelle, would you please join us and launch today's Lunch and Learn?
Thank you, Shauna. Welcome, everyone. I'm delighted to have you here today. The purpose of this session today is actually a continuation of a conversation from our think tanks last fall in the segment called Reinforcing Communities. In that session, we were joined by Dr. Elizabeth Plant, who is a mental health and substance use physician on Vancouver Island. And she has a vested interest in the opioid crisis and what's happening. And what Dr. Plant spoke about was how survivors of brain injury following a non-fatal overdose are falling through the cracks at an alarming rate. She also pointed out how delayed neurological consequences after a non-fatal overdose result in greater potential of misdiagnosis and treatment. Along with this need for appropriate housing and supports for individuals who have survived a non-fatal overdose and are living with a hypoxic, anoxic, or anoxic brain injury. And just to clarify for people that means they lost some of oxygen or all the oxygen due to the overdose and are living with significant brain damage as a result. The point here is that these people are often younger folks and they require lifelong care, and their recovery is going to be very complex. Communities across the country are experiencing an increase in overdose survivors. And as we know, there is a Canada-wide opioid crisis, and British Columbia has been identified as a significant hotspot. Saving lives is important, and we are saving lives in this crisis. But I'll say what I've said for years. We need to save lives, but we also must recognize that we have to sustain quality of life after we save a life. Given the reports from Dr. Plant and other doctors, for example, at St. Paul's Hospital in Vancouver, who state that the number of survivors with a brain injury arising from a non-fatal overdose are significant and they are not being tracked, means these folks are definitely falling through the chasms and are extremely vulnerable. So I am looking forward to our conversation today to talk about what's happening in other communities and where we want to go. Thank you.
Thanks, Janelle. Before we begin, a few general comments. Those of you who were here last week met our trusty Zoom supporters, Paige Corbett and Paulina Kostecki. Paige and Paulina, can you just wave? Paige and Paulina are graduates of Mohawk College's postgraduate certificates in brain disorders management and concurrent disorders. They're doing field placements with CGB this summer. The recording of today's session will be posted on the Heads Together Think Tank website, and we encourage you to send the webinar links to others who may not be able to attend these Lunch and Learns. Today's session will go quickly. We're committed to finish by 1 p.m. Pacific time. Our aim today is to foster constructive conversations about how to raise awareness of overdose and brain injury. We hope the conversations here will also expand your connections with others working in the brain injury field. One last announcement, we'll be limiting the chat function to only connect with hosts during the interview. We'll reopen the chat to everyone after the interview. Before we dive into today's session, we'd like to know who's with us today. We're using the Mentimeter platform for our polls, as mentioned in the note with the Zoom link. Your answers to this poll are completely anonymous. And I'm just going to share my screen here to show you the poll site. So here you should be able to see the Mentimeter screen. If you can go to menti.com, and you can do that on your phone or in another window on your computer, and enter the code that you see at the top here, 72389715, and Paige will put that in the chat as well. Once you get there, you'll see a list of choices for what is your connection with brain injury and overdose, if any. And you just need to click on submit. You can choose up to 3 answers if you find that your work crosses a number of different those. So we'll wait for a couple of minutes for people to actually begin to put their answers in. We will be using the menti.com site again at the end, so you can keep that browser open on your phone or on your laptop. That's great. So people, some of you here today work with folks who've had a brain injury, some work with folks who have substance abuse, some are not directly employed. Wonderful, wonderful. Okay, so that will stay open for a moment if some of you are still trying to get onto that site. Good, wonderful, great. That just really helps us understand who's here. Terrific, thank you so much. I'll stop sharing now, but that site will remain open if you're still working on getting your answers in. Really appreciate that. So today, our format, as we did last week, is to have an interview, then breakout conversations, then come back and talk about what we've all learned. So it's time now to introduce our guests. The first guest I'd like to introduce is Maggie Hathaway. Maggie's been on the Powell River City Council continuously since 2008. Her portfolios include social planning and protective services. Now it looks like I've frozen. Sorry people, it looked like I froze. Maggie's portfolios include social planning and protective services, fire, police, and bylaw enforcement. Maggie also sits as the city representative on the Community Action Team, a group funded by Vancouver Coastal Health to fight the opioid crisis. Maggie was the constituency assistant to Nicholas Simons, MLA for Powell River and Sunshine Coast from 2005 to 2018. So she's got great municipal and provincial experience. Prior to that, she worked as a legal information counselor for Legal Aid for 12 years. Maggie's very concerned about the opioid crisis and expanding services for survivors. Our second guest today is Debbie D. Debbie's been the executive director of the Powell River Brain Injury Society since 2003. She was also a city councilor in Powell River from 2008 to 2014. Debbie's been innovative in her role as executive director for the society. They offer a wide range of services, including individualized support, community rehab, care management, and more. Sadly, Debbie has experienced the loss of people to opioid overdose, including a brain injury client. She's extremely interested to bring about increased awareness of the connection between acquired brain injury and addiction. Welcome, Maggie and Debbie. Janelle will be interviewing you. So we've just got 20 minutes for the interview. So let's get started. Janelle, over to you.
Thank you, Shauna. Welcome, Maggie and Debbie. I'm happy to have you here today. So the viewers know that this is actually a conversation that Maggie and Debbie and I have been having since 2019, which was the last UBCM. So we're talking about that. But I do want to make note to say today that it's important that folks understand that our statements and positions here today and our thoughts around this are not representative of the BC Brain Injury Association, the Brain Injury Alliance of BC, or any association or organization beyond my organization, Powell River Brain Injury Society, and Maggie. Debbie has sent the information to the other groups, and so they're aware of what our conversation is. She's asked for their support, and we're hoping that they will be supportive of it. But we don't want people to think we are representing them, because we do not have the authority to speak for others or imply that our position is reflective of theirs. So I just want to honor that for people. Also, I'd like to note that following our think tanks last fall, a full report was sent to the Ministry of Mental Health and Addictions in February. We have not received a response from Minister Malcolmson, but her office, when I called earlier this month, told me that they're currently working on a response to us. And as soon as we get that, we'll let people know what they say. It's also important to say that we did extend an invitation to Minister Malcolmson to join us today for this conversation. And I was told that a request was put forward to her coordinator and they did not respond. So unfortunately, she will not be joining us today, but I will be sending her a follow-up information about these sessions. So we feel that we've done what we can to include others in the conversation, and we'll get started in doing what we can here today to inform people on our view. So Maggie, I know that Shauna has introduced you, and as well as you, Debbie, but before I start asking my questions, I just maybe in your own words, tell us why you're passionate about seeing some change and bringing light to mental health, addiction, and brain injury. So I'll start with you, Maggie.
Thank you. Yeah, I got started involved in this when I was working for the MLA, and I had 3 young moms in my, well, they weren't young, but younger than me, in my office. 2 of them had lost sons to overdose, and the other one felt that her son's death would be imminent. So as a city councilor, I decided nobody's told, this was before fentanyl was a household word. And so we said, let's have a meeting, a public meeting, and see who shows up. So I chose kind of a small venue because I was afraid no one would come because no one likes to talk about these things. But I was just overwhelmed by the turnout. The people were out the doors, and we had every cross section from, we had police officers, ambulance attendants, doctors, lawyers, the professionals. We had family members, and we also had users. And the users were willing to get up and speak at this meeting. And from that, we recognized that in the community of Powell River, there was a huge issue. We were second highest number of deaths from fentanyl per capita in Vancouver Coastal Health Region, second only to downtown Eastside. And we're a small, isolated community. We still haven't figured out why that is, but something had to be done. Vancouver Coastal Health came through with funding for community action teams. So we have that committee in Powell River at the present time, and it is providing ongoing supports for everyone suffering from mental health and addiction issues, from housing to harm reduction product, training, whatever it is people need, that they're there to help. And almost every organization in the community is represented at the table when we have meetings. So we've been a very, very successful CAT, as they call them. And so that is where my interest began and continues to this day. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Maggie. Debbie, how about for you in just a few words, why this is an important topic for you?
Sure. So, well, this is an important topic for me. I mean, at the crux of it, it was my sister that passed from an acquired brain injury 20 years ago, how I got into this business. And over the years, we've had several co-diagnosed clients who also have issues and have recently lost one to a fentanyl overdose. And there's just got to be more that we can do at the ground level. I think that, like Michelle had an anoxic brain injury, my sister. And when we're talking about overdose and overdose deaths and the brain injury that happens after an overdose, what concerns me is that, yes, people are falling through the cracks, but also that there doesn't seem to be any acknowledgement that this is going to become an issue. And so there's no plan for the future. And we as a group need to raise our voices and say, we work in this industry, we know what's going on, please listen to us. We want to help you plan for the future. And here is the things we need. So that's sort of what is going on with me, as well as expanding on that intimate partner violence and brain injury that comes from that. Because not only is there violence with blunt force trauma, but there's also abuse that causes issues that cause people to go out and do things they normally wouldn't. In this case, I can explain that longer at another time, but that was my sister's case. her anoxic brain injury was a direct result of abuse that she was having at home in her married life.
Okay, thank you. My husband also had an anoxic brain injury, and it wasn't until Elizabeth Plant spoke when I first heard her that I fully understood why they actually wanted me to have my husband institutionalized. Now, he only lived for 5.5 months, but I did, have always wondered what would have happened to him had he not had his family, because he would not have recovered the way other people can recover from brain injury. So it is kind of devastating. It is devastating. It's not kind of, it is devastating. So Maggie, I'd like you to explain to our viewers what UBCM is and its importance within the province, because in the think tanks, one of our call to action is engaging all levels of government in this crisis.
Sure. So UBCM has been around for over 100 years, and it provides a forum for local governments from all across the province to get together to discuss issues of common concern. The annual convention is held in September each year. But prior to UBCM, there are other organizations that are more localized. And here in Powell River, we have the Association of Vancouver Island and Coastal Communities. So we get together in May or June, I can't remember, and come up with motions for UBCM, but issues that are particularly affecting our area. So motions can come to UBCM from either your local association, or in this case, I'm bringing forth a motion to UBCM about brain injury being included in the not so new ministry anymore, but the Ministry of Mental Health and Addictions, because I think that's the missing link there. So the motion will come to the table. Sometimes we don't get through them all, and so they just go through as a block, which is frustrating, but I may ask at this time that if we meet in person, that the motion be pulled out so I can actually speak to it and provide the importance of including brain injury in that ministry, and hopefully that they can actually provide funding that's a line item in the budget so that people don't have to be applying every year for funding here and funding there, because I think the opioid crisis is going to cause a huge increase in brain injuries that are drug induced, and it needs to be recognized and it needs to be dealt with financially. So I'm kind of going on a political tangent there. UBCM has been around a long time. It's a great forum to bring forth issues just exactly like this.
Okay, thank you. So Debbie, do you feel that you can share specifically what this motion is going to say? Do you want to, do you have that hand that you could read to people?
Sure, I can do that. I can let you know that the motion is going to be going to City Council in Powell River on Thursday night. And I just wanted to add a little bit to what Maggie was just saying. And also her and I met this morning, and we thought that she's going to ask the CAO of the city if they can meet, because councillors and mayors meet with the ministers at UBCM. So she wants to meet with Adrian Dix and see what his appetite is for letting go of some of that Ministry of Health money and actually funneling it into where it's actually going to do some good. Not that it isn't doing good, but where we may be able to do a bit more. But so the motion, it's basically the same motion that went to the UBCM 2 years ago. And it's whereas in April 2016, the province declared a public health emergency. Growing number of individuals survived non-fatal overdose or living with anoxic and hypoxic brain injury. And they're falling through the cracks at an alarming rate. And whereas the acquired brain injury is a condition that affects personality, mental, physical health, and our future. And then a bit of statistics about how many there are. And then another whereas the current system of post-acute brain injury supports is non-existent or has barriers to access the much needed wraparound supports. And that's a key phrase, the wraparound supports. Reduce overdose deaths, reduce mental health issues. So therefore be it resolved that the delegates of the 2021 UBCM convention request the British Columbia provincial government to change the name of the Ministry of Health and Addictions to the Ministry of Brain Injury, Mental Health and Addictions with proper financial support, and further that the province work with grassroots organizations and the federal government to create a national strategy for acquired brain injury that is adequately funded for this national crisis. And so that's the motion that will go. And I can also add on to the end of that, that motions that are passed at UBCM at the provincial level, there's one level up called the FCM, which is the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. And that's where something like this needs to go next, once it gets approved and gets some teeth.
Great, thank you very much. So Maggie, I'm going to come back to you, and I was going to ask you about the community action team, but I want to actually talk about the funding for this ministry. Now, I sent both of you an article that Rob Shaw had written, and he's a journalist that, very grounded in political affairs. Now, so in Rob Shaw's article, he says that the Ministry of Mental Health and Addiction has about $13 million a year of funding. The majority of that funding goes to the minister and her staff there, and none of it goes to programs or services. And so my understanding through that article is that Minister Malcolmson is saying that, it's better left with the health authorities to administer those funds. So now with this motion that we've all put together and the fact that you may be able to speak with Minister Dix, how do you feel prepared to address that part with him, that they actually don't fund programs and services? It is in the health authorities, and brain injury is so underserved within the health authorities. Our community organizations are underserved or under-resourced to serve the number of people that they have. So I know that puts you on the spot a bit, Maggie, but I was shocked by that article and wonder your thoughts about that.
Okay, I'm a fast dancer. I was shocked by that too, particularly because they run no programs. That is entirely staff wages, $13 million. What are they doing? That's my first question. And I'll be doing some research on that ministry before UBCM to get a background on what is it you're doing. And I'll be speaking to our MLA here, which is still my former boss. So I'll have a little bit of an in there and saying, I want you to find out what that ministry does. And is it really necessary? Because you're right, all the mental health and addictions monies come through Vancouver Coastal Health for our area. And they funded us very well. I certainly can't complain with that. But we have a ministry called Mental Health and Addictions, and we'd like to add brain injury, but it needs to be doing something more significant. So I've already asked, I met with the mayor and our corporate officer and the RCMP just before this meeting, and I advised them of that article. Did you know that there's $13 million of taxpayers' money that provides no programming? And so I've asked our corporate officer to set up a meeting with Sheila Malcolmson and Adrian Dix and address that. Like, okay, maybe that ministry, the new ministry, needs to be getting funds to particularly support brain injury because it's not being supported by anyone. So I've got some homework to do. Anything you guys can provide me with, I would be happy to receive. And hopefully we get a meeting with each of those ministers. And I certainly will be prepared to speak to this motion and how important services for brain injury are. And they're going to become more and more important as we go down the road.
Right. Thank you. And I know that in our think tanks and reinforcing communities, Dr. Higginbottom spoke too, and he has told me clearly, this should be in there, but he said this is a ministry without money for programs. So it is an issue. So quickly before I ask Debbie, because I'll probably have room for one more question, but I do want to ask you around the community action team that you said, they are focusing on the housing and the opioid crisis, but specifically, does brain injury get talked about with the community action team?
Not really. And so again, it's the missing link, or I can't remember how Debbie put it, the orphan.
Yeah, that brain injury is the orphan of our healthcare system. Yeah. Exactly.
That was it. It was a good phrase. So no, because it's not, they haven't, I'm sure that the Vancouver Coastal Health people that attend to our supportive housing every day know that there's brain injury involved. They're nurses, they're psychiatric nurses, they get it. But it hasn't really been brought up in a big way. And we haven't been meeting because of COVID, but we do have a meeting coming up fairly soon. So I will bring this motion to that group as well and ask them to get behind and support it and help me equate the connection between overdose and brain injury and why we need to support brain injury in a much bigger way than we have. And just a little bit about our community action team. We've done a whole lot of work, and at this point in time, we have an overdose prevention site, which was, I think, the first rural community to have one. Downtown Eastside had one, but we have an overdose prevention site where people can go and take their drugs in a safe surroundings. We've done a ton of naloxone training around the city. Just about every organization in the city has been offered, and most of them have accepted the training, and you get a free kit so you can have it with you in your car or your purse in case you come across somebody overdosing. We have harm reduction supplies and local drug checking. So if people want to stay safe, the opportunities are there for them. And then, of course, we also have the supportive housing where we achieved a 44-unit supportive housing here through the work of the CAT, the Community Action Team, and they do all that work there as well. So we've come a long ways. We have all kinds of programs, and I was just talking to the police today about a connection with the Community Action Team, partnering with the police when somebody, if they're going to do a wellness check, or if somebody has a mental health issue that they need to go to the psych ward and the police are going to arrest them under the Mental Health Act, take a social worker, and that social worker hopefully can have them go voluntarily, but have those kinds of supports. And they have those programs in the Lower Mainland, but not so much here in small communities. Anyways, I digress.
Okay.
I hope I answered the question.
Yeah, no, you did. Thank you. And it is just going to take people like you to be inside organizations and groups to help us raise this awareness. That's what it's all about. So change is good. Yeah. So Debbie, very quickly, because I know we're going to move to other segment here, but there is some angst around brain injury moving, us asking this be moved into mental health and addiction. So from your perspective in a brain injury association, why does it make sense to you that this happened?
So when I heard about that, when you sent me this, that there's mixed thoughts about putting forward the resolution to change the name, I can understand that from someone's perspective that hasn't been in the conversations. Is it premature or could we try this again and then use this as a jumping off point to have more involvement and make the necessary changes to the ministry, the way it's funded, the way it's structured, and things like that. So this motion, although all maybe don't agree with it, maybe it's a good place to start. Because so much more needs to be done. We need to have involvement from all of the ABI groups in the province, of course. And the province also needs to know more from us, those of us who are doing the work, who have the info, who are here on the ground. Like I said before, we want to help plan for the future of what we know is coming and what they refuse to accept. So maybe this is, like I say, a jumping off point for more of us to get involved and for more to be done.
Mm-hmm. And it's important to reiterate to people that what we know about brain injury, the number of people who are living with brain injury in this province and are underserved already, that these community organizations are under-resourced to serve those numbers. And what they're talking about are people who are not being tracked now and living with a brain injury as a result of a non-fatal overdose and not getting the services they need. That is going to create more pressure for our community grassroots organizations who need to be doing this work, who the communities want them to be doing this work, and we need to fund them accordingly. And right now, those budget lines aren't there. Mm-hmm. So, I think that we're in a good place to turn this back to Shauna and to keep it moving forward with our questions. And I'm hoping that both of you can stay with us to do some final comments. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Janelle. And Maggie and Debbie, you've given us a lot to think about. Certainly raising awareness of brain injury and overdose started in the early days of this now 5 year-old provincial emergency in emergency care and naloxone kits and community action teams. So the on-the-ground work has been really good. But what's obviously beginning to emerge are some of the longer-term effects. So what we're going to do next is move into breakout rooms of 3 people. You'll be assigned randomly to the breakout rooms. And while our focus is on expanding awareness of brain injury, we hope that you either meet new people or strengthen connections with folks you already know. Building the network of people working to raise awareness of brain injury is a secondary goal of these sessions. I'm just going to share my screen because our breakout questions are a little bit longer today. So they are here. First of all, to share your experience with overdose and brain injury. And from the Mentimeter poll, it looks like many of you have good experience working with brain injury. So just a brief sharing of what your experience is. And really then talk about 2 things. What's the biggest challenge about raising awareness of post-overdose brain injury in your community? Is it around frontline services? It is around policy? What's the biggest challenge in your community? And then just to balance that out, what works well in your community to raise awareness of post-overdose injury? What are the successes you've had? And when we come back after the end of 10 minutes, then I'll ask for volunteers to talk about what did you learn about some of the approaches that work really well to raise awareness of post-overdose brain injury. Like all of our conversations, we urge you to listen well to each other to make sure everybody has a chance to speak. Paige will put the questions in the chat and Paulina will send them out in the broadcast rooms. And just a reminder that you'll get a notice 60 seconds left in the breakouts, after which you'll automatically brought back to the main meeting room. So without further ado then, because these conversations are really important to making sense of raising awareness, Paulina, would you please create the breakout rooms? You're coming back. Welcome back. Welcome back. Excellent. Thanks everyone for coming back. I think Maggie and Debbie gave us a great starting point for the conversations, and I hope in your breakout rooms you were able to just add to that in terms of, you know, the challenges you have and what's working. So I always like to start with what's working. So who would like to share what you learned about what's working in your community about raising awareness about overdose and brain injury? And you can raise your hand, or you can go to the reactions button at the bottom and raise your hand that way.
Just before you get started, I'm going to have to leave. I'm going for my second COVID shot.
Oh, so yes.
Yeah, I know. But it's been my pleasure to be with you today. And if I can help in any way, you know how to get a hold of me. So thank you for having me, and good luck with the rest of your presentation today. Thanks a lot,
Maggie. And good luck
Bye.
with your UBCM resolution, your motion.
Thank you. Thank you.
Best wishes. Great. Great. Okay. So who'd like to share what works in raising awareness? Sorry to lose Maggie. Who'd like to start us off? Debbie, thanks.
Sure, I'll speak a little bit for Maggie on the community action team. And I think what's working is the the level of interest from each of the grassroots organizations at the table. That's actually producing results. So it is one very good example of different groups coming to the table with the same issue and actually getting some results. So that's a start. I'll put the caveat in there. It's not nearly enough, but it's a start.
I love the way you're starting us, Debbie, on today. And I think that sometimes is a big move, because people will say, well, I don't have time to get together with folks, but really it is so essential to have grassroots folks that are working on the issue around the table together. So that's great. So thinking about what might you do in your community to really support that. What else came up in your conversations? What works?
So,
Hi, Vanna, thanks.
yeah, something that I've noticed that's, I think, a good start as well is the more awareness and the advertisement. So I just heard on the radio, it's kind of like changing the conversation, even with gender. So, you know, that women can also face these, and so can men, and kind of even it's awesome to hear it, because I think it's opening conversations and maybe trying to make it less stigmatized. I think that's also a good start. Hopefully it'll work well.
Wonderful, thanks. Yeah, so I heard a couple of things in there. One is just opening the conversation, having the conversation, and there was something about an ad. So how might there be ads or public service announcements? And we've learned a lot about raising awareness in COVID, what works, what doesn't. So great, thanks, Vanna. Who else? Who else?
I will just say that Debbie and I and Maggie had a great conversation about the need possibly for a provincial campaign around all of this, to include brain injury, and to get as many people to come together and to step out of their territories, step out of their organization, and come forward shoulder to shoulder and say, this matters in all communities, and brain injury matters, and we need to educate how these intersections are coming together.
Yeah,
Great, thanks.
sorry, I was just gonna,
Go ahead.
I would agree. I actually have never had, in any of my training, had brain injury and overdose put together. Like usually I'm the one asking the question. And when I do ask the question of like, oh, what are the survivors, the statistics of survivors who now have brain injuries from surviving their overdose, often the people doing the training have no data, they have no references, they have no resources. So I don't find that those two things are yet to be together in people's minds in conversations.
That's a great point, Dale. How we talk about things really so often influences how we act on it, right? And if we don't have those words together, if we don't use those words together, then that will have implications for how we do things. So that's really important. And that's a pretty simple thing that any of us could do, right? We could talk about it differently. I also like what you said, Janelle, because while there's the front line and the grassroots that Debbie was talking about, and the individual action that Dale was talking about, we need the structures to change. So how can we participate in some of those provincial campaigns? Well, perhaps municipal as well as provincial campaigns to educate and to change policy. So great points. What else? Who else has a comment? We had a bit of a discussion, Paulina and Paige and I don't know, they're not putting you on the spot, but we also talked about it. Who else? Debbie? Sure.
Sure. I was just discussing with Debbie there, we talk about campaigns and advertising and these sorts of things, but what about how we get to collecting some real data, real numbers, and let those speak for themselves, right? Let that kind of get out to the public and let them form their own opinions around that too as well, right?
Great. So collecting data and having research, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Wonderful.
That, making sure that it's not falling between the cracks, so to speak, right?
Right. Leanne, that's a really important point. And how can we influence the researchers too, in terms of the research that they do and the data that's available to us? That's wonderful. What else wants to be said before we begin our wrap? Got time for one more comment.
Well, I could keep going.
Sure.
I have more to say.
Sure.
I wish there was better screening for brain injury, not just screening. Like for community service providers, when you meet a client, I wish there was better screening. Normally, I find out my clients have a brain injury just from general conversation because I've experienced in that field. I can pull it out of them. But we need better screening, and we need better information on the language of what a brain injury is. You have to ask the question the right way. If you say, do you have a brain injury? They say no. And then you find out they've had 12 overdoses. They've never been told this is actually causing deficits in your brain, and that's a brain injury. Right. So I wish people would either recognize brain injury in all these different formats, or really be clear with the people we're treating or servicing that, a concussion is the same as a brain injury. Not breathing for 3 minutes is causing brain damage to your brain. I think all of that has to be kind of talked about. People don't talk about that piece of it. So better screening and better use of language, I think.
Wonderful. And so that education is with our clients as well as providers. And provider education was one of the recommendations out of the think tank last fall. So that's something, again, that we might take forward with local politicians, local and provincial. So we're coming up to our last 9 minutes, folks. So we're going to have to do a bit of a wrap. And what I'd like to do is invite Debbie back to help us close the session by inviting any closing comments you have.
Well, thank you very much. This has been an exceptionally eye-opening meeting for me. Not only, I mean, Janelle knows that 2 years ago when we did this, we sent this motion to the UBCM. And like Maggie was saying before, sometimes if they get so many motions, they take some that they think are similar and they bundle them. And then the delegates vote on the bundle, yay or nay. The bundle did get voted yay last time, and it went to the UBCM executive where it's still sitting on someone's desk. So I think what we need to do somehow, and what we talked about before, is a provincial advocacy group, and somehow no one knows what it is until it happens to them, really. So how can we express to those who do not know how important this is? And I think that's a next task. To make the connection between overdose and brain injury, and like Leanne mentioned, gathering stats is huge. So maybe we go to the universities, maybe we do some workshops, maybe we talk to master's students and doctoral students and say, what would you think about a thesis or a dissertation on something like this? Or go to the actual university board and say, would you approve something like this to begin with? I mean, it's got to start with education.
That's great. Thanks, Debbie. Your point is well taken. Of the three of you, you and Maggie and Janelle, you all have personal experience with this. So that is a really important starting point. Janelle, I'd like to invite you to join in for your closing comments, please.
Thank you, Shauna, and thank you to Debbie and Maggie and to everybody who's participated. So not unlike our think tank sessions in the fall and our day of collaboration a couple of years ago, all of these have been very informative and passionate, and people want to see things come forward. So I do want to say that at CGB, we are very concerned about the intersections of mental health, addiction, and brain injury. And I can tell you that as a clinical counselor, every client with a brain injury that I am honored to serve comes to me because they're experiencing anxiety or depression. And those are mental health issues. Many of them have drug and alcohol challenges. Those are substance use issues. So Paige is going to put into the chat, and I will post this link when I post this recording, to a video that our organization partnered with the CRIDGE to produce. And it is called Surviving the Perfect Storm, Mental Health, Addiction, and Brain Injury. And in the video, Dr. Wayne Gordon from Mount Sinai Hospital talks about the fact that depression is very common for a large number of folks who are living with traumatic brain injury. And he says that the end point of depression is suicidality. And therefore, one of the greatest predictors of suicide is a traumatic brain injury. So that is concerning for all of us. And we also have experts in there talking about 60% of traumatic brain injury survivors, moderate to severe traumatic brain injury experience, are engaging in dangerous levels of substance use. So for our organization, it makes sense to me that we get some attention to brain injury around mental health and addiction, right? So yes, there is stigma attached to mental health and addictions, but there is also stigma attached to being diagnosed with a brain injury. And some of the angst of having brain injury being included in mental health and addiction is adding that stigma. But I really believe that if we're going to be authentic in our work, and we're going to walk our walk and talk our talk, which is to remove labels and stigmas and provide services and supports for people when they need them, for however long they need them, and in the way that they need them, it makes sense to me to bring brain injury to the forefront with these intersections. For me, brain injury, and for people across the country will tell you, brain injury is more than a healthcare issue. Nonetheless, that's where we sit under healthcare. So I feel like I'm frustrated and I'm tired that brain injury doesn't get the attention that it does. And we just get lumped in or, under the radar. And I think it's time to bring some light to this. So we have gaping holes in our system that includes lack and clear, consistent best practices in dealing with these intersections, a lack of early intervention, a lack of adequate supportive housing, a lack of counseling for both the survivors and the family, and a lack of seamless and integrated supports that meets the needs of the individual for the length of time that they need them. So what we ask everyone to do is to go to our headstogetherthinktank.com website, download our full report from the proceedings of the Heads Together Think Tank last fall, our infographic, send that to your mayor, your council people, send it to your MLA, send it to your MP, and just share it with everyone to say that this is an important topic and it's time that our survivors of brain injury get the services and supports that they need. And the only way to do that is to make this a budget line and is to fund these community groups who are providing those services and other organizations. So there are other groups that provide brain injury services and supports. They all need to be funded. People have the right to have the quality of life that they deserve. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks,
Thank you.
Janelle. We've just got 2 minutes left. And so before you leave, I'm going to share my screen once again for our last poll. And here, and this is really important for us as we go towards our last session, is what one change would make the biggest difference to improve awareness for post-overdose brain injury in your community? Go to menti.com, the same code, 72389715. You may still have it open. And you can type in as many answers as you wish. And that will stay up even after, I'll leave it open for a few minutes after you leave this session today. So I'll leave it open after 1 o'clock. So the answers will start coming as people hit submit with their ideas. And as you're doing that, thank you so much. I always love to see the answers start to come through. We owe some really big thanks today, certainly to our guests, to Maggie Hathaway and to Debbie D. Thank you so much for coming today and for the advocacy work that you're doing on behalf of people with brain injury post-overdose, the advocacy work you're doing in the province. Thanks to all our team members, Janelle, as ever, for your vision and your inspiration, to Dale for standing by in the background for technical support, for Paulina and Paige for your active Zoom support. You guys are amazing. But most of all, to all of those of you who came today to really share your experience and talk about brain injury and overdose, your experience, what works in your community, and how we might improve things. I'm going to stop sharing and say thank you to everybody. We've got just a minute left. Please feel free to open your mic and say goodbye in a way that you want to say goodbye. We'll leave that Mentimeter open for a few minutes, but thank you so much everyone for coming. We hope to see you next week. Our third Lunch and Learn is with Kix Cheatham from the Nanaimo Brain Injury Society. She'll be talking about thinking outside the box, addressing the chasms in care. It'll be a very interesting session. So welcome back next week. Please see you then and have a good week.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
We'll talk, Janelle.
Thank you.
Thanks, Debbie.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks, Leanne.
Thank you.
Yeah, nice to meet you, Leanne.
Back.